Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Pivot Well. Today we are picking up where we left off last time, and that was with feeling like a burden. Have you ever felt like a burden? Another way that we could probably frame this is, do you feel the need to have a sense of control of everything in your life? Or do you feel this need for someone else to be around you, kind of like a codependent feeling? Why would I bring up codependence and control when I'm talking about being a burden? Why would someone develop this need for control in their life? You could say, well, Sarah, it's because they felt out of control of their life. And what was the consequence of them feeling out of control of their life? When I was younger, I don't know what started this feeling, something I'm working on in therapy, but I remember always wanting to make sure I was never a burden to anyone. I wasn't thinking that in my head, like, oh, don't be a burden, Sarah, because I was little, I was young. I think it would more show up in ways like, I can do this myself. I can get my juice myself. I can put my clothes on myself. I can pack my own lunch. I can pack my backpack. I can read a book. And it was on a smaller scale when I was really young, because my sister and I were very close. She's 2.5 years older, my biological sister. And so she was very good at not making me feel like a burden to her. We were very close when we were younger. But I think combined, we both had to kind of help each other. My parents separated when I was young. And while things were kind of chaotic around us and we had to go back and forth between homes, and there was definitely things that could have came up during that time, which would have made Beth and I feel out of place, like we were maybe a burden to someone. Like it would have been easier for them to not have to deal with these two little girls in this situation. My grandparents did a lot of my sister and I's upbringing. And my dad worked second shift, and that would normally mean he would go to work at 2 and he would get home at 11, which is a huge chunk of like the day for a kid. I would see him in the mornings, and then sometimes I would remember him coming home at night. But that was really like, my grandparents would watch us the rest of that time. And my sister would go to school at the beginning, and I would go with my grandpa and we would run errands. I actually went between my grandparents at that point. So life didn't look like it did for everyone else for me. And I really didn't know the impact, I guess. But it was hard to see others getting to go home to their parents. And I knew I had to go to my grandparents because my parents couldn't take care of me at that point, which in a little girl's brain would mean that she was a burden to them, even if they never said that. So I became very independent, and I would, take care of myself, and my sister would take care of, me and herself. So we became very independent. Then when my dad remarried and we moved into that home, the feeling of being in the way kind of shifted. And I guess even just how I explained it, it became a feeling of being in the way because my dad remarried someone who didn't have kids and had never had kids. So she had definitely a culture shock having two girls come into her life, which up to that point had been very, kid-free. She was a 40-year-old woman at that point who had not had kids. So we came in and it was a lot, but her mom would take care of Beth and I a lot. Interestingly enough, it was that same dynamic though. The people who were supposed to be like my mom and dad, she was my stepmom, but she was definitely trying to play the role of my mom in some ways. But here I am again, having another grandparent take care of me for the most part, and I finding a lot of my needs met by a grandparent because I was too much for someone else. And I heard that so much. I had ADHD, and it was, Sarah, you're just too much. You're too much. Calm down. You're too much. I heard that so much. I've heard that my whole life, I feel like. And so I put this very strong guard in the way of that little girl who felt hurt by this, that said, well, you don't need anybody. And if you're too much, then you'll just take care of yourself. So I did. I learned how to do that. As I got older, it got worse. The circumstances got worse. I definitely remember hearing growing up terms like, you have to earn your keep around here. If you're going to live here, you need to make money to live here and pay for your spot. I had my first job at 13, hearing things like that. I don't know who would say that to their 13-year-old daughter, but I did hear it, definitely. And then when we got foster kids, when they came into our house, that was around that age, I definitely started to hear that saying more. You have to earn your place around here. Well, they are bringing in money, you're not. Like, we would hear that statement from my stepmom, and who says that to their kids about their other kids? So you're fostering, that should never be the statement that's made, that they're bringing in money, you're not. So one's a source of money, one's not. Things got worse, though, if you can guess, because I got really sick when I was 15 years old. And I kind of have talked about this a little bit before, but the feeling of being a burden could never have been bigger than when I got sick. It started off, I have Crohn's disease, and leading up to the diagnosis, I was having a lot of stomach pains, and I would tell my stepmom and my dad, and I think they took me to the doctor a couple times, and he just said I was an anxious girl. And that was brushed aside. And I kept complaining, and I realized that people were starting to get annoyed with my complaining. And so I tried to stop saying something about it. I simultaneously started to notice this area on my stomach, like growing, like a bulge on my stomach. And it hurt so bad, but I had been told to stop complaining about it. I'm just looking for attention. I'm just being dramatic. The word dramatic is such a awful word for a kid, because you'll see why. I felt like I was being dramatic, and so I was not going to tell anybody about this pain and this place on my stomach that was getting bigger. In school, I was being made fun of because my stomach was making so many noises. This one guy called me dragon stomach because my stomach was making such loud noises during the PSATs, which was humiliating. I was in a ton of pain. And then one weekend I started to get really sick, and I was throwing up a lot. And of course, at that point, my stepmom was like, "You're fine, you just have a stomach bug." I was so sick. And I thought, okay, well, I've never had the stomach bug, but I'm miserable. And she's like, "Well, that's what it's like to be sick, like it's not comfortable. Of course, you're sick." And I couldn't eat anything. I couldn't keep anything down. But I started, the nausea started to go away around the end of the weekend, I guess, maybe Sunday afternoon. And that's where my stepmom was like, "Well, yeah, it was just the stomach bug, the 24-hour stomach bug or whatever." Okay. And I trusted her. And I trusted the doctors who had said I just was being anxious. Then I started getting more sick during the week. My stomach started to make more noises. I was getting sick at school. And one of my friends actually said, "Hey, maybe you should go to the doctor." And I said, "I've told my parents I'm not feeling good, but they don't think it's bad enough for me to go." And she's like, I think you should go." I was like, "No, it's fine," because I didn't want to be a burden. The next day she came back to school and she said, "I talked to my parents and they're happy to take you to the doctor if you want, because you seem pretty sick." And I was like, no, don't. I'm fine. I was afraid of getting in trouble if her parents told mine, because I'm sure there would be a consequence of me going and, making a big scene. That was a common statement too. I heard a lot growing up. "You're making a scene. You're making a scene. You're being dramatic. You're overreacting. Suck it up." Things I heard probably on the daily. Why would somebody, by the way, feel like a burden? I wonder if they're being told all the time that they're too much, they're being dramatic, they're overreacting, they need to suck it up, they need to deal with it. And so I I tried to not make as big of a deal about my stomach at school. I didn't want to get in trouble. I tried not to make a big deal about it at home because I didn't want to get in trouble. And I just dealt with it until I remember Friday night. I started getting, it was like a thing about Friday night. Always seemed to get super sick. I got so sick and I was throwing up again, and the pain was awful. And again, I was told, it's fine, suck it up. I don't really know why. I guess like after 2 weekends, why would somebody not want to like take me to the doctor? Like one of my parents, it just, to this day, it never makes sense. I think at this point, my stepmom thought I was just being dramatic for attention. Like I could make myself profusely vomit over and over and over for attention. She like even at one point said, you're probably just, sticking your finger down your throat to make yourself throw up. I was 15. I was 15. I remember that whole night I was sick and throwing up, and she would tell me to go to my room, and I was like, I can't, I keep throwing up. So she like gave me a bowl and she's like, stay in your room. And then it like died down a little bit the next morning, and then I tried to eat something and then immediately had to run to the bathroom, threw it up again. I threw up the whole weekend. I couldn't eat anything. I couldn't keep anything down. So Sunday afternoon, finally, well, I was getting worse and worse. And I remember that they were going to have a movie night. They were going to watch a movie. And I was, at this point, I was terrified. I was miserable. I was in like horrendous pain. And when you're dying, your body knows. It was like something in my mind was like, you need to do something. I remember too, actually, like the night before that, my sister had came in and made like a bed out of towels on the floor for me so that I could have a place to lay by the toilet because I couldn't leave the bathroom. So Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening, I started getting so sick and I was like screaming, begging for help. I was yelling like, I need help. Like, I'm so sick. And then my stepmom was like, you're being dramatic. And I was like, no, I'm not. And she's like, we're trying to watch a movie, Sarah. Go back in the bathroom. We're trying to watch a movie. I was crying. And I remember at one point, she came and like held the door shut to keep me in the bathroom because she thought I was being dramatic. And I was banging on the door. For the longest time, there was this blood, like a spot on the door, fingerprints, like blood, because I had been throwing up blood at this point. And when I was banging on the door, that spot stayed there for years, and I never washed it away. I think because there was a part of me that just was like a reminder that I'm not crazy. Anyway, this is where I get into my story this is a difficult part of my story to talk about. I was terrified. She was acting cruel. At a certain point, I remember my dad stepping in. He would sleep back in their room, and they had this big closet they had a bed in, and it was like completely dark. So he would go in there and sleep. And if he came out, because he could hear like noise, you would know like you're being loud. So he came out like, what's going on? And she was like, Sarah's being dramatic because of this. And I remember just like this moment of me looking at my dad's eyes like, please help me. Like, please help me. And I could see he was concerned. Like, and my stepmom had said, I was a paramedic. She's fine. And my dad came back to the bathroom with Pepto-Bismol and a spoon, and he stood there and he's like, here, how about you try this? She was like, no, she's fine. And I was like, no, I'm gonna throw it up. And it was this moment of the two of them. Sorry. It was the moment of like the two of them, and I was begging my dad, please see me for once. See me. Somebody. I'm so sick. And finally I said, if somebody doesn't take me to the doctor, I'm going to call 911. I knew I was dying. And that kind of defiance, that kind of like challenge would not have came out prior to this point in my life. I would have never, if they had said don't do something, there would have never been a challenge of that. I would have always, okay. But the fight or flight part of you will eventually kick in, and I had literally nothing to lose. And at a certain point, I think I threw up blood and my stepmom saw it. I think that was the first time she actually saw what was coming out of me, and she agreed to take me to the doctor the next day. So my dad did, I remember him sitting there with me the rest of that night, and I was so in so much pain. And the ride to that doctor's office was so miserable. And we got there, threw up in the office lobby while we were waiting for the doctor. And when we went back to see him, they got us back pretty quickly. He looked at my stepmom and he was like, "Why did you bring her here? She needs to go to the hospital immediately," which was so satisfying to me because I was just so, I was afraid he was going to say, "You're fine." I was afraid he was going to say, "You're being dramatic." And that moment of him saying that was just this relief. Somebody heard me. And then he had this nurse come in and give me a shot of Finnegan in my butt. Finnegan is not fun. I was in a lot of pain. That hurt so bad. Oh, I remember. But it did help me like feel not so nauseous. I mean, like I was, even if there was nothing coming up, I was, I won't get too much detail there. But yeah, she gets me in the car, and it's interesting how her tone shifted when she realized the severity of the situation. She suddenly was like, "Oh, yeah, we need to get, okay, that's what I thought. Yeah, okay, we'll take her." And like Mom of the Year came out and was suddenly on my side. I was so angry about that too. I remember just like, I had to force you to take me here, and now you're acting like, "Oh yeah, that's what I thought," and whatever. And turns out I had Crohn's disease, and I was actually really relieved it wasn't cancer. I didn't know anything about Crohn's, but I was really relieved it wasn't cancer. I remember that, and I thought, okay, well, I'm sure that's like, you can get it under control. And they're like, yeah, some people can, they're fine. They live normal lives with it. It's not too severe if you can get under control. I was like, great. So they got me on some steroids. They got me on some pain medication, and they got me on fluids and a really strict diet. And for the next couple of months, I was in and out of the hospital. I would be like a week in, and I would be out, and then I would get really sick again, and I had to go back. Then they sent me to the specialist, and he was like, "Let's try putting her on chemo," because I need to get a really aggressive anti-inflammatory, and the steroids weren't working, so he tried a chemo drug, and I was given chemo shots at home, and nothing was working. And I remember another time, like another night, kind of similar to the first, where I was getting really, really sick, and it was bad. And they took me to one hospital, and they said, "No, you have to take her to this other hospital because she's technically a child, and we're just not really qualified to do surgery, and that's what she's going to need." And I had to have surgery. I did have surgery. It went poorly, and I spent, that point, 18 weeks in a hospital. Every time the doctors would come in, they would tell me, it's not better. We're not, things are worse. I had to have multiple surgeries. I had developed peritonitis, which is like where your intestines leak into your peritoneal cavity in your stomach, basically the area around all of your organs. And it's very, very dangerous. I went septic, and I was in a coma at one point for a while. And it was a very long road to, I didn't even really recover. I had an ileostomy, I had tubes, I had drains. And I ended up having to go home and all this stuff. And if I felt like a burden before, I had no idea how much of a burden I was about to feel like. Going home and all the things that they had to do. Pack my wounds, give me my fluids, change the ostomy bag, and this is where I wanted to start going into healthcare, because I started to teach myself how to do all of those things because I felt like a burden to my parents. My dad was pretty good about it, but when he wasn't there to do it, my stepmom was mean when she would do it. She was so annoyed by the fact that she had to do these things. And she was very rough. And if I said, ow, like that hurts, she would get annoyed with me. And so I started to do it myself. I learned how to do it myself. And I was so proud of that. And great. She didn't have to deal with it. I didn't have, or my, dad didn't have to deal with it. I could handle it on my own. I learned how to size my ostomy bags. I learned how to measure out my fluids that were going to go into the feeding tube. I learned how to pack my own wounds and dress them and all that stuff. I had like a tackle box full of medications and supplies and things like that I had to use. I was very, very, very sick, but I was like, nope, I'll deal with it on my own. And I actually have seen a lot of people on TikTok who, if they have some kind of a chronic illness, I'll see them doing a lot of their things on their own, and there's that sense of control. I don't know how many of them stem from this feeling of being a burden, but that's what I felt like when I was in that situation. Like I already hated that I was different. I hated that I had to do all these things on my own, and I wanted some sense of control, and I didn't want others to feel like they had to do anything to take care of me. So it was like this twofold situation. Anyway, to make a short story long, I went through about 2 years of this off and on, very sick. I eventually was able to get the ostomy reversed and get the drains removed. I had multiple surgeries, but it ended up, I had 7 major surgeries in 2 years. I spent a total of 32 weeks, and this was in 09, which 08, 09, right? So things were already tight budget-wise, and I was the scapegoat for everything after that in the family. If we couldn't go on vacation, it's because Sarah's bills had to be paid for her medical whatever. If we couldn't go out to eat, we're still paying on Sarah's medical bills. This was my stepmom's big push. I will say that my dad did not ever push these on me, and you'll see me kind of like differentiate them. My dad, again, was still working night shift and sleeping during the day. He was not around as much as I wish he had been, but my stepmom very much would push all of our financial problems onto me and my health and what it cost the family, which is very hard when you are a 15, 16-year-old. Felt this immense amount of guilt, and I had to work more. So I had to get extra jobs to pay for my debt that I had caused the family. I had already been told that I had to work for my place in the family. I had to work to earn my keep by watching the Foster's kids and, having this job. I used to clean on the side, but then I had to get extra jobs and make more money, and I would go to school, and we actually qualified for like Pell Grant. And so I went to school technically, I had to drop out of high school, by the way. This is where I did drop out of high school, because it was too much work to get me acclimated into school again, because in my mind, I'm a burden. You see the pattern. And that just continued on, and it got worse and worse, and it started stacking up, and my mental health started to decline even more. And things got really ugly at home. And I was so tired of always being made to feel like everybody's burden. And I had already tried to control everything in my life, right? I was already looking for that control prior to all this happening. I dug my heels in even harder when it came to this control aspect. I wasn't going to be told what to think, what to feel, what to say, what to do. And that butted heads with my stepmom, who was a very controlling individual. And I, of course, had issues after the hospital mentally. I went through a lot of time in the hospital. I suffered from ICU psychosis. And so they had put me on some antidepressants and antipsychotics while I was in the hospital. Well, she made sure those continued on. And then before I was even old enough to have this diagnosis, she had a friend of hers who was a psychologist put a diagnosis of bipolar on me. And then she started having him tell this other physician to prescribe me meds. And it was a way of keeping me subdued, if I give her all these drugs, and she would, if I was defiant or if I said anything wrong, she would say, "You are manic, you need to have your meds up." Now, before I go any further, I have everything I'm saying is nothing against people who need medication. This was something that was weaponized against me. If I had truly needed it, I would have been, I'm full support of that. But I, at the time, really could tell that this was something that was being weaponized against me. And so I was very irritated with that diagnosis, because what it allowed my stepmom to do was control my mental health. So she was having the doctor, and she would tell him what she would think. Because before I would even get the prescription, she would say, "You need to be on lithium. You need to be on Geodon." And with all the foster children that we had, a lot of them had medications. And so she started to learn about all those cocktails. And things just kind of spiraled into this point where if I said anything out of line, there would be a consequence. And often it would be going back to the doctor and getting a medication adjustment. And I was recovering from a very traumatic event in my life. I had to drop out of school. I had to reacclimate by getting a job. I got my GED, went to community college, and I was juggling so much. I had this stress at home. I had this trauma that was just basically, I was told to forget. Okay. And I was always told, it's in the past. You're not allowed to talk about it anymore. Yet it was all that was brought up to me. You're such a burden. You're such a burden. And so this is just the perfect storm of, I'm tired of feeling like a burden. And it took that part of me that was already very independent, and it just made a monster, if you will. I became a machine of, I'm going to do things my way, and no one's going to get in my way, and no one's going to tell me what to do, what to say. And I was like a bulldozer. That part of me is what pushed me out of the house into Florida. That part of me is what pushed me I found a psychiatrist to help me properly get off the medication that had been put on to control me. And I started to create my fortress of control so that I would never be a burden to anyone again. And I made a point in my mind, nothing I own will be someone else's. I will not let anyone ever make me feel like a burden again, because it hurt. But I didn't at that time know it was hurting me. I saw this as a sense of pride. And so I created this tank who would get as many jobs as she needed to get to pay for her car, pay for her school, pay for her insurance. I couldn't ask anybody for help. It wasn't safe to ask people for help. And I was going to school to get a job that I knew would make enough money that I would never need anybody again. And you know what? The unfortunate thing is I did get a job that I don't need anyone. You're going to be like, why is that unfortunate? It's fortunate because I do feel grateful to be in a position where I can take care of myself. But I have just strengthened that monster within me. And so where I said I'm going to be transparent with you in this podcast, 2 days ago in therapy, I was talking about this part of me and how it affects everything. Like even my marriage, I have a hard time trusting. I don't know what it would be like to just let go and let somebody else take care of me. I can't even think about it. But then there's a part of me that really wants it. And you're left with this feeling when you get older of, I don't want to be a burden, and you want to be in control. And it's the hardest thing to overcome. It's the hardest thing to explain to people. They don't understand it. And so, if you're in that position, and It's hypocritical of me to say, but if you're in the position of you don't know how to ask for help, start small. Like my therapist said, just start with something small. Ask for something small. It doesn't even have to be money. Maybe you just need a hug. Probably not. If you're like me, I don't like hugs. I didn't want anything from anyone, like even physically. Like I don't like to hug my friends, things like that. But eventually you're going to have to learn to let people in. I'm talking to myself right now. Eventually you're going to have to learn to let people in. Being a burden is something that someone at one point in your life made you feel because of their own issues. It has nothing to do with your worth. Your worth is not tied to the people that hurt you. You had it at one point tied by that person, perhaps, or maybe, you tied it there because you thought these are my parents or these are whoever, and I respect them. Or maybe it was a significant other that you are dealing with. You can release that. And realize that that's not true. That's not your worth. Your worth isn't based off of somebody else who doesn't even have their own life together. What I'm currently going to try to work on in my own life is finding that worth within myself. The worth that I do have for myself, I do know that it's in God, and I do believe that I have a purpose for being here. And learning to just let go. And if you have any suggestions, if you've gone through this and you've found a way to lighten up on your control, I'd love to hear it. That's what I'm working on right now. This just was on my heart, so I thought I'd talk about it. I think it's really important. I think this is a really important topic. You can have a lot of things that just accumulate over the years that lead you to this point where you feel like you are just the world's burden. I hate that for you. I hate that for us. You're not. You have worth. You have meaning. Tie it to something good, something bigger, something that won't let you down. And we're all going to have to learn to let in those people in our lives. And the only way I know how to do that is therapy. Working on it. But like I said, if you have any suggestions, I will take them. But I wanted to give you the full story about why people do turn out the way they do. There's always a reason. You don't just simply become a controlling person. It's not just a personality trait that you spawn out of nowhere. It generally comes from you needing to be, and that being a part of you that saves you at one point. And that's a great thing. And God designed us to be adaptable. But he also designed us with the plasticity in our brain that can allow us to rewire it into a way that is healthier. And that's what I'm working on. And if I find the key to that, I'll let you know. But anyway, thanks for watching this episode. And like I said, feel free to leave any comments below or share or, post any thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And thanks for watching. Look forward to talking with you guys again next time.